Okay, my dad boarded the Suwannee in 1943. I think it was around March. He was first in what they call the First Division. And the First Division was just a large accumulation of a lot of the sailors on the ship. His first job on the Suwannee, he worked in the kitchen, or the galley as they called it, and he was part of the cleanup crew. And he told me one time that he decided he did not want to spend the rest of the war cleaning up pots and pans in the kitchen. So he went and had met some of the people in the signal gang. These were the guys that worked the semaphore flags and the lights that flashed when you moved the handle, and also ran the flags up and down the parts of the ship so they could give signals to other ships. And talked to the chief, and he took a test and passed it in flying colors, and he became a member of the signalman gang, as they call themselves.
Okay. What do you know? Has he told you about October 25th and 26th, 1944?
Okay, in the day that I know the most about is October the 26th, 1944. That was the day that they took the second kamikaze on the bow of the ship. My dad was on duty at the time on the bridge where all the signalmen, they had a little room where they sat in and they worked in pairs. There were always two signalmen on duty all the time. And it was around lunchtime, and he had been relieved of duty to go eat lunch. And he was just returning from the galley after eating lunch. And because the Suwannee it used to be an oil tanker that they converted into a escort carrier, they were limited into walkways. So they had walkways that were on below the flight deck, but they were on the outside of the ship, so you could actually look down and see the water. There was a ladder on each end, and that was basically the only, you either had to go back the way you came or you went up to the flight deck so you could go to the where his location was, where he was supposed to be. And that's when the second kamikaze hit. And of course it was a lot of fire, a lot of smoke. Most of the communications in the ship, as I understand, were out. And he was there with, I don't know exactly how many people, but there was an officer there, and because he couldn't communicate with anybody and the flames and the smoke and everything, that he ordered the people on that walkway to abandon ship, and they all jumped off into the water. He floated around in the water just with his life jacket for a long time. Then a destroyer came by, and I asked him many, many times if he could remember the name of the destroyer, but the action was too furious, I guess. And they threw a lifeboat out into the water, and several of the guys climbed into this lifeboat. He was in the water about 8 hours without the lifeboat. So he was, just floating in the water, and they ganged together as best they could, and they stayed in the life raft the entire night, and a destroyer picked them up the next morning. And then they spent one day on the destroyer, and then he went back on to the Suwannee. And of course later they went back into Brewington to get fixed up.
Mm-hmm. When he got back on the Suwannee, there had been a lot of fires, a lot of damage, a lot of men had died and were injured. Was he did he help in that, or was that already kind of passed? That had
mainly already passed. He was off of the ship for probably 36 hours. So a lot of course all the fires were put out, and I'm sure everything was still quite a bit of a mess, but he basically never told me too much about after, when they got back on the ship. I think most everything had been cleaned up and the things had taken place, and they were getting ready to, go back into a port so they could leave for Brewington.
Now, some of the, one of the other interviews, Mr. Robert Pelcher, he got on the Suwannee after the attacks had happened.
Right.
I think it had already been fixed up, and your dad was still on it?
He was still on it. They went into the shipyard at Brewington I don't remember exactly how long. I'm sure many of the sailors could tell you, but it was a 6 or 8 week period where they got fixed up, and then they went right back out to sea and went to the Okinawa campaign. And he stayed on the ship. In fact, my dad, some of the people got off of the ship after the war. My dad didn't. I was always told, he didn't tell me directly, but he was part of the crew that went to Japan, and that he volunteered to do this, that he had enough points to go ahead and get out of the Navy at that point. But he volunteered and went into Japan, and he was at Nagasaki. He was walking. He walked around Nagasaki. Of course, there wasn't much left of Nagasaki at the time, and part of what the ship did at that point was they ferried servicemen and prisoners of war back to the United States that had been in Japan all those years.
Did you have any stories about coming back from that?
He not any real detailed stories. He had always told me that that part of what he did in the Navy was the thing that he was the most proud of. He said that some of the POWs were half starved to death or full starved to death almost, and that was something that had a lifelong impression. He told me one time that being on a warship, that you weren't that close to the actual fighting between two people on different sides. It was airplanes, and you didn't get to see your enemy that much. But after he had seen what the Japanese had done to the prisoners of war, that was something that really left a lasting impression on him. Mm-hmm. That's when he got real close to it, I think.
I know he was at the big reunions that have in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Did he go to the first one?
He did not go to the first one. He did not know about it.
Mm-hmm.
If he had known about it, he would have gone, I'm sure.
Was he at Cleveland?
He didn't miss a one.
Okay.
The second one was in Lafayette, Louisiana, mm-hmm. and he didn't miss a one until he died.
Mm-hmm. What do you know about his experiences at the reunions and seeing the men again?
He was very, very excited and elated when he heard about these ship reunions. My dad was sort of instrumental in finding some of these people. My dad had and he still, in fact, it's still at my mother's house, an old address book that all the people that he became very close with on the ship and other people that he had met, he had their names and addresses of that time, 1943, 1944, and some of that information was used to contact people.
Oh, great.
I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. That's where he moved. He was from a little small town in Tennessee, but that's where he stayed, in Memphis. And there was a gentleman, I think he made it to one reunion, who was from Arkansas, and except for your dad, he was the only sailor on the ship that he had seen until the reunions. I thought they had met in Memphis one time.
Wow. Did you know of, I guess, I know I've got to refer to my questions.
Okay.
The question basically is, what's it been like to be able to meet again with the men who served with him on the Suwannee? Did
Mm-hmm.
he ever express anything more than elation about going?
Well, except from the fact that it rekindled a lot of deep and true friendships from a long, long time ago. After the reunions had started, there was Christmas cards to everybody every year. Certain letters at certain times when something happened. Everybody stayed in touch and kept up with the kids and the grandkids, and so he just got to know these people all over again.
I'm going to kind of ask you a little about your thoughts. Your dad, my grandfather named my dad after your dad. You're named after your dad. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, there's one other. My son is named
And
after
your son
him.
is named
after
after
him
him.
too, also. That was something that made my dad, very proud. someone felt that strong of a bond that they would name somebody after him. It was special to him. It was important.
Did you know that he had been, someone else had been named after him
Yeah.
outside the family?
Mm-hmm.
What did you think about that?
Well, of course, when I first heard it, I was probably very young, but
Mm-hmm.
it didn't catch on at the time. But sitting around talking when I got very interested in what happened to him during the World War II. We'd sit and talk a lot, and he would bring that up several times. That Bill named his son after me.
Mr. Robert Pelcher said a lot of good things about your dad, and he basically said that he was the epitome of a gentleman, and he said he was one of the men that he remembers most and that helped him become the man he is today. And what do you think about that? That your dad's...
That's awful nice. Bob has, I've known him for 3 years now, and that means a lot to me that he said those kind of things. Yeah, and my dad was a good man. It's not just because he was my father, but I've known him for 46 years. Before he died. So he always lived his life that way. He never cared about. He told me one time when this was how he thought about war. Is we were watching one of the D-Day celebrations. I can't remember if it was the 40th or the 50th, but it was one of those, and we were sitting watching it together. And he thought that the newscasters, Tom Brokaw or whoever had done it, was glorifying it a little bit too much. And he told me, he said, there's nothing glorified about war. He said people get killed and people die and people get hurt in war. And he said he hopes there's never any more of them.
Me too.
Yeah, I think we all should think that way. And he was a very helpful person, I think. He had told me this story, and your grandfather has told me this story about the time when they first met. And my dad was already on the ship, and your grandfather was just coming on the ship. And my dad was tall. He was 6'2", which I guess is not tall in today's terms, but 6'2" back then. And he saw your grandfather coming on the ship, and of course when you come on you have the big duffel bag and all these other bags, and you're carrying all this stuff. And he saw this guy trying to come up the ladder with all of all of his things, and he was having a very difficult time. So my dad ran down the ladder and said, "Hey fella, you look like you need some help," and grabbed a bunch of your grandfather's possessions and hauled them up the steps for him and took him into the mess hall where they were supposed to meet and figure out what their jobs were supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. It's a helpful kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
What do you know that your dad would want people to remember about his service during the war? What would you like for people to remember about his service in the war?
Well, he would not want people to remember anything that he did, I don't think. I think he would be more interested in knowing what the sailors of the ship as a unit did. They did the things that were necessary to bring that war to an end as quick as possible. And I think that's what he would like to have remembered. He was never one for personal honors or things.
Sounds like a neat person.
He
Wish I'd
was.
met him. Thank you for your time, Tom.
No problem.
I really appreciate it.
Okay.